Hi there, and welcome back to Haunting Vales. Today, we journey to the rolling hills of Provence, where the air is heavy with the scent of lavender and whispers of something far darker. This is Death in the Lavender Fields, a Hercule Poirot mystery. So, take a seat, let the breeze carry you through the purple rose, and listen closely as the little gray cells unravel a murder hidden beneath beauty. Chapter 1. Arrival in Provence. The midday sun spilled over the hills of Provence in a golden haze, as though the whole countryside had been brushed with warm honey. Fields stretched out in perfect lines of violet, the lavender swaying gently. In the breeze like an endless purple ocean. The air was heavy with the scent, sweet, intoxicating, almost dizzying, and somewhere in the distance, cicadas sang their steady, rhythmic chorus. It was here, in this corner of rural France, that Hercule Poirot had chosen to take what he called a small but necessary holiday. After the storms of London's fog-bound cases and the unrelenting demands of the city, even the great detective could, on occasion, seek out the quieter pleasures of life. Or at least, that was the plan. The village of Saint Remy de Champs was small enough to be overlooked on most maps, but to those who knew it, it was a jewel. Its cobbled streets, wound between sandstone houses with shutters painted in pastel shades of blue and green. The main square held a fountain carved centuries ago, its surface worn smooth by time, and the single bakery was said to make the finest almond croissants in the region. Poirot arrived by motorcar, a polished black Peugeot hired in Avignon, driven by a courteous young man who, although respectful, could not hide his curiosity at the small gentleman with the extravagant mustaches sitting in the back seat. Poirot wore a cream summer suit, immaculate as ever despite the dust of the journey, and in his gloved hands rested a cane he had no real need for, but carried with elegance. As the car rolled to a stop outside the Hotel de Lavandes, a modest, yet charming establishment run by a widowed innkeeper named Madame Fournier, Poirot stepped out into the warm air and breathed deeply. Ah, the scent, he murmured to himself, closing his eyes for just a moment. Nature's own perfume, n'est-ce pas? It is enough to soothe even the most agitated of little gray cells. Madame Fournier bustled out to greet him, her cheeks flushed and her apron dusted with flour. Monsieur Poirot, bienvenue, bienvenue. You must be tired from your travels. Come, I have your room ready, with the balcony that overlooks the fields. She ushered him inside, chattering all the while about the annual Lavender Harvest Festival that would take place in 2 days' time, a celebration of music, dance, and local produce that brought visitors from miles around. Poirot listened politely, noting the way her voice brightened when she spoke of the festival, but dimmed ever so slightly when she mentioned one particular name. And of course, she said, almost reluctantly, there will be the competition, the judging of the finest lavender oil. This year, as every year, it will be between Monsieur Lucien Morel and Madame Colette Duret. It is always a point of some tension. Poirot, ever alert to subtle changes in tone, raised an eyebrow. And this competition, it is serious? Madame Fournier gave a small laugh, though it carried no real mirth. Serious? Monsieur, it is war, fought not with weapons, but with distillation stills and secret blends. You see, the prize brings prestige, and contracts worth thousands of francs. There are those who would do much to win it. Poirot inclined his head thoughtfully, but said nothing more. In the quiet elegance of his balcony room, he unpacked with his usual precision, each item placed just so. From the open window, the view was breathtaking, row upon row of lavender shimmering in the afternoon light, with the pale outline of the Montagne Saint-Victoire in the distance. Somewhere beyond those fields, he knew, the Morel estate lay to the east, the Duret farm to the west. As evening fell, Poirot decided to take a gentle walk through the village. The streets were quiet, save for the occasional clink of cutlery from a cafe terrace or the laughter of children playing near the fountain. He passed the small post office, the grocer's, and finally came upon the village square, where a few stalls had already been set up for the coming festival. A tall man with sun-darkened skin and the build of one accustomed to physical labor was arranging baskets of lavender bundles. This, Poirot learned, was Lucien Morel himself. "Bonsoir, Monsieur Poirot." Morel greeted him, having been told by Madame Fournier of the famous detective's arrival. His handshake was firm, his expression open, but his eyes, Poirot noticed, were watchful. "You come for the festival, yes? It will be a fine year." "Indeed," Poirot replied. "The lavender, it seems most abundant." Morel's face tightened almost imperceptibly. "Yes, though Madame Duret will say hers is finer. Always. She will say this. But we shall see." He spoke with a mixture of pride and irritation, and Poirot detected that the rivalry was not merely professional. As the night deepened, Poirot returned to the hotel, only to find the dining room abuzz with the latest village gossip. At one table sat Madame Colette Duret, a woman in her early 50s with sharply tailored clothing and a hat adorned with a spray of dried lavender. She laughed loudly at something a young man beside her had said, but her eyes flicked briefly toward Poirot, assessing him in a glance. Later, in the soft stillness of his room, Poirot stood once more at the balcony. The fields below were silvered by moonlight, the fragrance of lavender drifting up like a whisper. Somewhere in the distance, a nightjar called, and then something else. A faint sound, sharp and quick, carried on the breeze, like a short, muffled cry. Poirot froze, every sense alert. He listened, but the night returned to its usual chorus. It might have been nothing. And yet, in Poirot's experience, such moments were rarely nothing. The next morning, the village awoke to unsettling news. In the western fields, near the Duret property, a body had been found among the lavender rows. A local field hand named Alain Gerard. He had been young, no more than 24, and was said to have worked for both Morel and Duret in the past. There was talk of an accident, a collapse from the heat, perhaps a snake bite. But as Poirot stood in the morning light, looking out over the calm beauty of the fields, his instincts whispered otherwise. The lavender swayed gently, concealing whatever secrets might lie between its stems. And Hercule Poirot, holiday or not, knew he would not be leaving Provence until he had found the truth. Chapter 2: Shadows Among the Lavender. The morning sun rose quickly in Provence, burning away the last traces of dawn's cool mist. By the time Hercule Poirot stepped out of the Hotel de Lavandesse, the village square was already alive with low murmurs and the occasional sharp exclamation. The news had spread like wildfire. Alain Gerard, the young field worker, was dead. And though some clung to the explanation of heat exhaustion, others, their eyes darting and voices lowered, hinted at something darker. Poirot walked at a leisurely pace toward the western edge of the village, the cane in his hand tapping lightly against the stones. He had made no formal announcement of his involvement. Indeed, he had not yet decided whether to involve himself at all, but already he sensed the weight of expectation. The villagers knew who he was. They knew that when Hercule Poirot was present at an untimely death, the truth rarely remained hidden for long. The path to the Duret property wound gently uphill, the air thick with the scent of lavender and the faint hum of bees. Ahead, the fields opened out into neat rows, stretching toward the horizon in disciplined beauty. Yet amid the order, Poirot's eyes sought the disturbance. A cluster of figures standing among the violet waves, their voices subdued, their postures tense. As he approached, he recognized Madame Colette Duret herself, her usually immaculate attire now softened by the morning breeze, and beside her, a man in the olive-green uniform of the gendarmerie. The officer's face was tanned and weathered, his expression grave. Monsieur Poirot, Madame Duret said, inclining her head. We did not expect, but perhaps we should have. Madame, Poirot replied, bowing slightly. I hear. There has been a most unfortunate event. Unfortunate. The officer echoed, his voice clipped. Yes, that is one word for it. He introduced himself as Sergeant Beaumont, the village's principal lawman. Young Gerard was found, just after dawn by one of my men, lying between the rows, as though he had simply fallen. Poirot stepped carefully between the lavender plants, noting how their stalks swayed and brushed against his trousers. The body itself had already been removed, but the impression remained, a flattened space where the young man had lain, the soil disturbed. Poirot knelt, touching the earth lightly with his fingertips. Was he working here yesterday? Yes, Madame Duret said. He came at noon, left in the afternoon. Or so I believed. Beaumont gave a brief, almost reluctant glance toward her. He was seen near the Morel property later in the day. Poirot straightened slowly. Ah, an industrious young man, it seems, working for both sides. Madame Duret's lips pressed into a thin line. In this village, Monsieur Poirot, it is not uncommon for laborers to go where they are needed. But Alan, he was ambitious. And sometimes ambition makes enemies. Poirot let the comment hang in the air before asking. And the cause of death, Sergeant? We are waiting on the doctor, Beaumont said. But there were no signs of violence. No wounds. No obvious cause. Yet you do not seem convinced it was natural, Poirot observed. Beaumont hesitated. It is a feeling. The way he was found. His face, his hands, they seemed wrong. As though something had seized him suddenly. Poirot's gaze drifted over the lavender rows, the gentle motion of their blooms, the deceptive calm. May I see where he was working yesterday? Madame Duret led him to the far end of the field, where the plants grew slightly sparser. Here, the soil was harder, dotted with small stones. She gestured toward a wooden crate half filled with cut lavender, the sickle still resting on top. This was his work, but he did not finish. Poirot bent to examine the crate. The stems were cut cleanly, but the pile was uneven, as though abandoned in haste. He brushed a speck of soil from one stalk and frowned. Madam, does your soil here often have this? She looked puzzled. That? It is not soil. It is ash, from the stills where we distill the oil. It should not be here, in the middle of the field. Poirot straightened, his eyes narrowing slightly. Curious. The walk back to the village took him past a narrow lane bordered by stone walls, and it was here that he encountered Lucien Morel. The man's shirt sleeves were rolled up, his arms dusted with pollen, his brow glistening with sweat. He looked as though he had been working since sunrise. Monsieur Poirot, Morel greeted, though the warmth in his voice was muted. I hear you are already walking the fields. I am merely admiring the beauty, Poirot replied mildly. But beauty, as we know, sometimes conceals a thorn. Morel's jaw tightened. If you are thinking Alan's death was foul play, you should know. He was a good worker, but not without faults. He spoke too freely, made promises to both sides. Poirot tilted his head. Promises? Of what kind? Information, Morel said curtly. He was in both my fields and Duret's. And in the weeks before the harvest, knowing the yield, the quality, that is valuable. Valuable enough to kill for? Poirot asked softly. Morel gave a short, humorless laugh. Monsieur Poirot, in this village, lavender is more than a flower. It is livelihood, pride, legacy. Some people would stop at nothing. As Poirot walked on, he felt the air shift slightly, a breeze carrying not just the scent of lavender, but something sharper beneath. The competition between Morel and Duret, it seemed, was more than neighborly rivalry. And Alain Gerard, moving between them, might well have been caught in a storm he did not understand. That evening, Poirot sat in the small lounge of the hotel, de Lavandes, sipping a tisane of herbs. Madame Fournier had brought him a slice of almond cake, which he accepted graciously, though his mind was far from food. From the window, the last light of day spilled over the purple fields, bathing them in an otherworldly glow. He considered the facts, such as they were. A young man dead without visible cause. Ash in a place it should not be. A rivalry sharp. Enough to wound reputations, perhaps more. And beneath it all, the sense that someone, somewhere, was watching him already. When the inn grew quiet, Poirot stepped outside for a final breath of the cool night air. The moon hung low over the hills, casting long silver shadows. And there, just beyond the square, a figure stood partially hidden by the shadow of a cypress tree. Poirot's gaze fixed on the silhouette, still, unmoving, before it turned, melting into the darkness without a sound. Poirot remained a moment longer, his cane resting lightly in his hand. The festival was only a day away, but already, the air in Saint Remy de Champs carried not just the perfume of lavender, but the faintest trace of danger. Chapter 3. The Festival of Purple and Gold. The morning of the Lavender Festival dawned with a sky so blue it seemed to have been polished overnight. Sunlight spilled over the rooftops of Saint Remy de Champs, painting the cobblestones in gold. From early hours, the village square had been transformed into a lively mosaic of stalls, banners, and laughter. Women in wide-brimmed hats carried baskets overflowing with bundles of freshly cut lavender. Children darted between tables selling honey, almond biscuits, and soaps shaped like tiny violets. Musicians tuned their accordions and violins in the shade of the old fountain. The scent was everywhere, warm, sweet, and so thick in the air that even a breath seemed to carry a hint of oil on the tongue. Hercule Poirot moved through the square at an unhurried pace, his cream suit and polished shoes immaculate, his cane tapping lightly with each step. He was not here as a judge, nor as a guest of honor, yet it was impossible for him to remain unnoticed. Vendors nodded respectfully, some whispering behind gloved hands. They knew who he was, and they knew that, despite his air of polite detachment, Poirot's little gray cells were never truly on holiday. Near the center of the square, a long table had been laid for the lavender oil competition, two gleaming copper stills positioned at opposite ends like opposing armies. At one stood Lucien Morel, sleeves rolled up, jaw set in concentration as he fed sprigs of lavender into the machinery. At the other, Madame Colette Duret, her lips curved in a cool smile, oversaw her workers, with an air of effortless command. Between them sat the jury, three respected villagers, including the mayor, who would judge the purity, fragrance, and yield of the oil. Poirot found himself a vantage point beneath the awning of a small cafe, from where he could observe without intrusion. He ordered a demitasse of coffee, black, strong, precise, and watched. The competition began with the clinking of metal, the hiss of steam, and the rhythmic hum of machinery. Each contestant worked with practiced skill, distilling the oil that would decide not only the year's champion, but perhaps the economic fate of their farms. Yet, as Poirot's keen eyes moved between the two, he noticed something curious. Morel's still gave off a faint wisp of smoke darker than the rest, subtle but distinct. Duret's workers, too, seemed unusually tense, glancing toward the Morel side more often than their own work. Poirot's gaze drifted to the edges of the square, where Alain Gerard's absence seemed to linger. The young man had, by several accounts, been present at this very stage last year, assisting first one side, then the other. And now, there was a gap where he might have stood, a silence where his voice might have carried. A shadow passing over the edge of the stalls caught Poirot's attention. A man, lean, sharp-featured, with eyes that darted like a bird's, moved quickly through the crowd, a satchel slung across his shoulder. He paused near the Morel still, bent as though examining the copper pipes, and then disappeared among the festival goers. Poirot filed the sight away in his mind. When the competition ended, The air was thick with tension. The jury withdrew to deliberate, and the crowd buzzed with speculation. Poirot, however, drifted toward the lane behind the square, a narrow path between two stone buildings that led to the temporary storage area where excess lavender was kept before processing. The smell here was almost overwhelming. Not the gentle perfume of the fields, but the concentrated punch of raw-cut flowers. Stacked crates lined the walls, some covered with burlap. Poirot, guided as much by instinct as by reason, knelt beside one crate whose corner was darker than the rest. He lifted the covering carefully. Beneath lay sprigs of lavender dusted not with pollen, but with a fine, gray residue. Ash, similar to that found where Alain's body had been discovered. Beside the ash, a faint dark stain clung to the wood. Poirot touched it with the tip of his gloved finger. Sticky, and unmistakably blood. The sound of footsteps approaching drew him upright. Sergeant Beaumont rounded the corner, his brow furrowed. Monsieur Poirot, what are you doing here? Poirot gave a small, polite smile. Admiring the storage arrangements, mon ami. Tell me, is all this lavender from the same field? Beaumont glanced at the crates. Some from Morel, some from Duret. All brought here before judging. Poirot stepped back, allowing the burlap to fall once more. I think, Sergeant, you and I should discuss a certain young man named Alain Gerard, and why it is that traces of his last moments seem to cling so stubbornly to this year's harvest. Before Beaumont could reply, a sudden cheer erupted. From the square, the jury had returned. The winner was announced, Madame Duret, by the narrowest of margins. Her supporters applauded, while Morel's clenched fists told a quieter story. Yet amid the celebration, Poirot's eyes caught another detail. The lean, sharp-featured man from earlier, now standing at the very edge of the crowd. Their gazes met for a fraction of a second. Then the man turned and slipped away once again, vanishing into the tangle of streets like smoke on the wind. The festival would carry on into the night, with music and dancing, but for Poirot the day had already provided something more valuable than entertainment: proof. Alain Gerard's death was no accident, and somewhere among these sunlit stalls and violet fields, his killer moved freely, certain they had covered their tracks. Poirot, however, had already found the first thread, and once found, such threads inevitably led to the truth. Chapter 4. The Man with the Satchel. The Lavender Festival stretched late into the night, its music echoing off the stone walls of Saint Remy de Champs. Laughter mingled with the scent of wine and roasted almonds, but Hercule Poirot left the festivities early, retreating to the quiet of the Hôtel de Lavandes. He had much to think about. The image of the lean, sharp-featured man with the satchel lingered in his mind, as did the gray ash and the faint trace of blood in the storage crates. In Poirot's experience, such details were rarely unconnected. Morning brought a change in the weather. Clouds rolled in from the west, muting the once golden light, and the wind carried a sharper edge. Poirot welcomed the cooler air as he made his way toward the gendarmerie. Sergeant Beaumont greeted him with a nod that was equal parts respect and wariness. Monsieur Poirot, he said, gesturing toward a small side room. You wish to discuss developments. Poirot sat at the plain wooden table, folding his hands neatly before him. Sergeant, I have observed your village and its people. There is much pride here, much history. But there is also tension, and I believe this tension has resulted in the death of Alain Gerard. Beaumont's jaw tightened. We have no proof it was murder. Poirot lifted an eyebrow. None? And yet, ash in the middle of a lavender field, ash upon the harvest crates, and blood, mon ami, on the wood itself. These are not the marks of the sun or of fatigue. Beaumont leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. What are you suggesting? That Alain Gerard's death was caused by something sudden, something introduced. Poison, perhaps, and that whoever killed him sought to hide their traces amid the abundance of the harvest. Beaumont considered this, then nodded reluctantly. "We have a name for your mysterious man," he said. "Jean-Luc Carrière. He's a trader, deals in herbs, oils, sometimes equipment. Not from here. Passes through during the season. Buys from both Morel and Duret when it suits him." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. A man between two rivals, much like Alain Gerard. Exactly. Some say he and Alain were friendly. Others say they were competing. Either way, Carrière left the festival last night before anyone could question him. Poirot tapped a finger against the table. "And where does one find such a man?" Beaumont shrugged. "If he's still in the area, he might be lodging at the edge of the village, near the old distillery. There's a boarding house there." Poirot thanked him and set off, the cane in his hand, keeping a steady rhythm as he walked. The boarding house was a narrow building of pale stone, its windows shuttered against the wind. An elderly woman answered the door, her eyes wary until Poirot introduced himself. "Carrière," she repeated. "Yes, he took a room 2 nights ago. Paid in cash. Left early this morning with his satchel." "And where was he going?" Poirot asked. She hesitated, then said, "Toward the Morel property." Poirot took this in with a small nod. "Merci, madame." The Morel estate lay east of the village, a sprawling set of fields and outbuildings. Poirot found Lucien Morel inspecting a row of drying lavender, his posture tense. "Monsieur Poirot," Morel said, wiping his hands on a cloth. "What brings you here? I seek a man named Jean-Luc Carrière. Has he visited you today?" Morel's eyes flickered, almost imperceptibly. "Carrière? No, I have not seen him since last year, perhaps." Poirot tilted his head, his gaze holding Morel's a moment too long. "Ah, perhaps I am mistaken. But tell me, was Alain Gerard working for you on the day he died?" Morel hesitated. "He was. In the morning. Then he left, saying he had business elsewhere." Poirot's mustaches twitched slightly. "And did this business involve passing information to Madame Duret?" Morel's jaw tightened. "Alain was not loyal. He took from me, and from her. If he is dead, I regret it. But I cannot say I am surprised." Poirot let the words settle before replying softly. "When ambition meets rivalry, Monsieur Morel, surprise is rarely the cause of death." Leaving the estate, Poirot detoured to the Duret property. He found Madame Duret in her office, a room that smelled strongly of lavender oil and polish. "Monsieur Poirot," she greeted, her tone cool. "I assume you come with questions." "Just one, madame. Did Alain Gerard work for you on the day of his death?" Her answer came without hesitation. "No, he was to assist us later in the week. But Alain, he was restless. He liked to move between fields." Poirot inclined his head. "And Jean-Luc Carrière?" "A merchant, nothing more. He came to me yesterday morning, asked about buying surplus oil. I told him we had none for sale." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Is he now a suspect?" Poirot offered no reply. Instead, he studied her for a long moment, as though searching for a detail she did not know she had revealed. That evening, back at the hotel, Poirot sat at the desk in his room, a small notebook open before him. In neat, precise handwriting, he began to list facts. Alain Gerard worked for both Morel and Duret. Jean-Luc Carrière also traded between them. Ash in the field, ash on the harvest crates. Trace of blood where there should be none. No visible injuries on Alain. Possible poison. He paused, considering. Poison concealed in something Alain would not suspect. Water? Wine? Or, perhaps, the lavender itself. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Madame Fournier stood there, holding a folded piece of paper. "Monsieur Poirot," this was slipped under the front door. No name. Poirot took it, unfolding the paper carefully. The message was written in a hurried, uneven hand. "Leave before the harvest ends. You are not wanted here." Poirot read it twice, then folded it neatly. "Merci, madame. And, please, double the locks tonight." Left alone, he placed the note on the desk beside his growing list. The wind outside had picked up, carrying the scent of lavender and something else. Faint, metallic. Poirot sat very still, listening to the soft rattle of the shutters. The game, it seemed, was beginning in earnest. Chapter 5. The Harvest Turns Red. The morning after the warning note, St. Remy de Champs felt different. The lavender still rippled in the wind, but the air carried a strange heaviness, as if the fields themselves were waiting for something to happen. Hercule Poirot stood on the hotel terrace, his eyes fixed on the road to the east. A figure appeared at last, lean, sharp-featured, the ever-present satchel at his side. Jean-Luc Carrière walked with the wary air of a man who had learned to survive by avoiding notice. But this time, he approached Poirot directly. "Monsieur Poirot," Carrière said in a low voice, "you will not have many more mornings here if you continue your questions. But Alain Gerard was my friend, and I think I know how he died." Poirot gestured for him to sit. Carrière leaned in, his voice dropping further. "He was poisoned. I saw him drinking from a tin flask the day before. He told me it was from the harvest, a gift from the Morel estate," he said. "But I know Morel. He gives nothing for free." Poirot's eye sharpened. "The flask, you saw it again?" "No. I looked for it after he died." "Gone." Poirot's mind worked swiftly. A flask, the perfect vehicle for a concentrated dose of oil laced with something fatal. No glass to leave behind. No cup for analysis. And lavender oil, with its strong scent, could conceal many odors, even those of a deadly additive. "Tell me, Monsieur Carrière," Poirot said quietly, "if one wished to make a great profit, how might one use such oil?" Carrière hesitated. "By stretching it with synthetic additives, cheaper chemicals. But those can be dangerous, toxic, even." Poirot nodded slowly. "And if Alain knew of this?" Carrière's expression darkened. "Then he was worth more dead than alive to someone." By late afternoon, Poirot had gathered them all in the distillery, the long, stone-walled room where the lavender harvest was pressed and distilled into the fragrant oil that was the village's pride. Lucien Morel stood near the window, arms crossed tightly. Madame Duret sat with her chin high, her eyes watchful. Sergeant Beaumont lingered by the door, his hand on his notebook. And Jean-Luc Carrière, silent and tense, stayed in the shadows. Poirot stepped to the center, his voice calm but carrying easily over the low hum of the distillery equipment. "My friends," he began, "Alain Gerard did not die of the heat, nor of an accident. He was murdered, and the method was both simple and devious." He paused, letting the silence grow. "Alain drank from a flask given to him during his work in the fields. Inside was lavender oil, oil laced with a toxic solvent used to adulterate the product and increase profit. The scent of the lavender masked the smell, and the strong taste would be explained away by the plant itself." Madame Duret frowned. "And who, monsieur, would do such a thing?" Poirot's mustaches twitched slightly. "One who was in financial difficulty. One whose harvest was not enough to fulfill the contracts he had signed. One who would mix pure oil with a dangerous additive, sell it as genuine, and destroy any man who might reveal the truth." His gaze moved slowly and stopped on Lucien Morel. "You, Monsieur Morel." Morel's face hardened. "This is absurd." "No, mon ami," Poirot interrupted gently. "You lie badly. Alain worked for you on the day he died. He left carrying your flask. You believed he had proof of your fraud, perhaps from Monsieur Carrière here, and so you ensured his silence before he could speak. The ash we found in the crates? From the burning of the documents he carried. The trace of blood? From your haste, when you cut yourself destroying them." Beaumont's pen scratched on his notebook. "Monsieur Morel, you will come with us." Morel's composure cracked. "He was going to ruin me. Everything I built, my land, my name." Poirot's voice was quiet. "A name built on poison is no name worth having." Beaumont stepped forward, and in moments, Morel was let out, his protests fading into the growing night. The festival resumed the next day, but the music was subdued. The air was cooler now, the scent of lavender tinged with something almost melancholy. Poirot prepared to leave, his suitcase neatly packed, his shoes polished to a soft gleam. Madame Fournier met him at the door. "It seems the fields will be quieter now, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot smiled faintly. "Perhaps. But in such places, madame, secrets grow as easily as flowers. One must always tend the soil carefully." As the train carried him away from Saint Remy to Champs, the detective looked out over the fields. Purple rose stretching to the horizon, and thought of the delicate balance between beauty and danger. If you enjoyed journeying with Hercule Poirot through the Lavender Fields, uncovering lies hidden beneath beauty, you'll want to stay for his next case. More mysteries await, each more intricate than the last. Subscribe and join me for the next story, where the little gray cells are once again put to the test.